All right, so welcome. It's April 29th, 11 o'clock. This is the next LPC Annexation Committee meeting. We had an excellent conversation going thanks to the wonderful presentation that Melanie made, and I hope that we will get back to that because I felt like we were getting somewhere. And I would love to hear, your thoughts on that. But I want to suggest something that we might do first. I actually went back and reviewed the whole video just before this meeting and pulled out what I thought were points that I heard. But given the Planning Commission meeting that we just had, and the last several Planning Commission meetings that we've had a lot of conversation about parking. Janelle brought parking up in our last annexation meeting. And I'm wondering if it's worth taking a moment to use our current parking requirements as well as what we imagine parking might look like, given some of the images that Melanie shared with us last time, as a way of organizing some of the challenges. And we've talked about, increasing density as an incentive for, getting some of this more traditional neighborhood design stuff. But given what at least I saw in our last Planning Commission meeting, there are limits to how much you can increase that density and still meet the needs of things like parking, right? Are we gonna have enough space to put a bunch of cars off street if we have a house that's only 16 or 20 or 25 feet wide? I don't know what that number should be. And I'm hoping, Janelle, that you can help us put some numbers to what we require now, but also maybe we can explore what flexibility we might want to add in so that parking doesn't become the thing that keeps us from being able to achieve what we might all want. So I'll just leave it there and you guys.
So I can answer some of that. The code is 2 parking spaces for a dwelling unit. And as we off street, we don't actually require on-street parking. We require 2 off-street parking spaces. So based on some of the information we were talking about last week, I've actually kind of taken some steps. If we leave the roads a little bit wider to allow for parking at least on one side or both sides, you've got additional on-street parking spaces. But we can also encourage rear-loaded house designs. Now remember, there's not a lot of alleys in the city. So that's actually very unlike Lewis. It's definitely a traditional neighborhood design, but it's unlike Lewis because Lewis doesn't have a lot of alleys. But what we can also encourage or require is that garages are in the rear yard and that you can have like one car space, one garage space, it's what we did for the duplexes is you can have a garage, not a 2-car garage, but a 1-car garage facing the road. And if you want additional parking, it goes behind. So you still get your 2, 3+ car parking spaces, but you're only seeing that one garage from the road, which I think can help because people do want their garages. And I think we can also, the code does allow for a 20-foot wide curb cut driveway, but if we're thinking, because you just look kind of down Market and Chestnut and the other areas, and because I think what we're trying to do is get more of the character from the downtown, is my understanding. If it's not, you just let me know. And we just say, hey, your curb cut and parking width can be 11 feet. It can be as long as you want, and you can go in the back, but we reduced it a little bit because which means you're gonna stack your cars, one and behind each other. But that happens I was at my parents' house this weekend, and that's what happened at their house. So, that's normal for families, but it also kind of then reduces, it will fit also within a reduced set area. So I also came up with some other ideas based on what we were thinking about and putting in the cluster idea. And if you don't mind, can I just go through them? Because I want to see if I'm hitting on the right spots based on what we were talking about. Is that okay with everybody?
Go ahead. Janelle, I think you have some really great ideas going there. The other thought that I had is that we require that if a garage is front loaded. In other words, if the car is going to come up to the front of the house, then the garage has to be set back from the facade of the house. And at the facade, that distance could be 6 feet, could be 10 feet. I mean, we probably should discuss a number, but that's reasonable. But I think that's another way to make the streetscape more attractive.
So what are the, where is it?
I mean, while you're pulling that up, Janelle, let me just say, the last house I had a driveway, a parking area that is non-conforming in the city according in R3 beach area, because it went the whole width of the lot. The previous owners had set that up. And we had the pleasure of having 4 cars sitting side by side. It was definitely not a very pretty situation. By comparison, we have a single driveway. Maybe it's 11 feet, maybe it's 10 feet. And yes, it's a hassle, but speaking to a lot of the comments that Melanie made at the last Planning Commission meeting, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think it's definitely something we should be pursuing is narrowing the driveways so that we have other things going on in the front yards. Even, and this is why I asked this question, is how small a driveway can we make? How small a lot does that allow us to have? How small a frontage does that allow us to have? So go ahead.
So typically what you need from back of the curb to the front of the house, you need about 20 feet for just, I mean, a standard parking space is 9 by 18. So if you want to get that car over that, you can do that. But I think what we could do, because again, sometimes if you put it to the side, maybe you're building a narrower house, because, or, you put the driveway and the car goes in the back. Again, I think these are all things we need to talk about. But so I've been kind of playing with the cluster ordinance and thinking of different ideas. And one of them is that the cluster options, no matter what, has to contain a mixture of housing types. No more than 60% of the development shall consist of detached single-family dwellings. Because I think everybody agreed from like very early on is that, we don't mind the duplexes and the townhouses. What you don't want is entire townhouse or duplex developments. You want that mix of housing types, right? That's what you guys were talking about.
I'm not convinced of that yet, but
again,
I mean, again, it comes down to all the other factors, the arrangement, all the stuff that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Janelle, I'm assuming it would have to say not simply that only single family, but you couldn't have 100% townhouses. Is that what you're saying?
Right. It's that,
okay.
It just, I mean, you have to have a mixture of housing, and that, you just can't have more of one than the other.
Or we can specify that, however,
mm-hmm.
I mean, that's going to be a process of discussion throughout the Planning Commission, up through the council and so on.
I don't even think we should specify what it would be. I think we should just say that there has to be at least a 60-40 split, something to that effect, and that way they can do any mix they want.
Okay.
How could you comment on why the curb for a driveway was supplied at 20 something feet?
That I don't know. Well, it's probably because it was maxed out at 20 feet, because again, your standard parking that gets you a little bit more than 2 parking spaces in width, because again, 9 feet plus 9 feet gets you 18 feet. They probably maxed it at 20 just for a little extra space. But that's my guess as to why it was limited to 20 feet. I know a lot of places, the minimum width is like 9 feet, because you don't want a driveway less than, like, you don't want a 7-foot driveway, because,
I
mean, certain vehicles just don't fit on that. So I think that's why they went with a 20-foot. I wasn't here. I don't know how long that's been in place. I'm suggesting 11 feet. If you like 10 feet, we can look at that. But I just thought, if we're looking at certain areas, why don't we try looking at reducing that curb cut and that driveway width, because I think what, from everything I've been hearing, is what you guys want is something that reflects, Market Street, Chestnut, 4th Street, 3rd Street, 2nd Street, which is the houses are much closer to the street. If there is parking, it's a single driveway. It's not a double driveway. And then it can kind of, because I was doing a lot of looking at the aerial photographs, and sometimes they don't have off-street parking. But I think we need to help with the parking situation, have some off-street parking as well as on-street parking.
Well, so one,
Yeah, I'm just
question
assuming that,
go ahead, Nancy.
sorry, I'm just assuming that the curb cut still will need to be wider than the driveway. And I say that because, having pulled out of a driveway that's pretty narrow, and cars tend to park very close to whatever the opening is for the driveway. Unless your street is pretty wide, it may be difficult to actually get your car out and turn.
Yep, we can do that.
I've forgotten what I was gonna say. So continue.
And I thought maybe another idea is that we allow lot averaging in the R2 zoning district. So what if we allowed our lot averaging in this one? All right, Nancy, you're on a delay.
And the objective of the lot averaging would be to permit some smaller lots that are balanced out by the larger ones. I mean,
Well, flexibility in design. I think it's not a bad idea.
And
right,
I think,
but then do you have something that basically deals with the overall, the average still works out to meet the intent of whatever zoning?
so I'm thinking we leave the standards that are and you can tell me if you don't like it, and I'm just throwing out ideas, that we leave the standard saying, okay, these are your minimum lot size and requirements, but then it's okay, well, you can do lot averaging, which means we're going to give you a minimum that you can go down to, which we'll have to tweak. So you have a little bit more flexibility to get those design standards, but your density is going to be based on the overall, lots. So we have 10 acres and we divide it by whatever, we get a certain number. But if we allow the lot averaging, what we're doing is you get to play with the lot sizes a little bit more, but you're not quite, I don't know. It's not coming out today. Sorry.
It gives an opportunity to react to site conditions, if you're constrained in one area, you might want to have the lots a little narrower. And if you have more room, you have the wider lot. So I think it's a good idea.
But so just so that I understand, I mean, given that 10-acre example that Janelle started working through, you calculate sort of a basic density that would apply. And my sense is the whole point here is that we would be able to conceivably we'd be able to provide flexibility in terms of the lot dimensional requirements, so that that number of parcels could actually be squeezed into a much smaller parcel, a piece of the overall property from which that 10-acre calculation was done. Is that the way you're reading this? And does that mean that we're giving a bonus of X number of houses when you do it that way? Because I think the whole point here is, like you said, Melanie, there may be site constraints. There may be certain parts of the site that we want to incentivize leaving alone. And in return, we're providing higher densities elsewhere.
So, and I think
it shouldn't be that we just let it all go at that higher density. There's got to be something that comes with it.
And again, I think that's why you leave that basic lot size, that this is your standard. You can play with it, but So if I can do my lot averaging, I might be able to get 2 extra lots than if they were all the standard same size. But at that point, they're protecting what we need them to protect.
Mm.
You know, so is that offset make sense? So, and I think there's got to be a little bit of give and take if we want developers to do some of this. Remember, it can't be all carrot and it can't be all stick. We gotta find a balance. So, and I also was taking into consideration Melanie's presentation about pushing the houses forward. So, and about the streetscape and the landscaping. So I was thinking, what if we allow the front yard setback to be reduced maybe to no less than 10 or 15 feet? But if you're going to do that, you've got to plant extra trees on the property. And not the street trees, but extra trees on the property. I mean, it doesn't have to be that, but I think if we're going to give something, we're going to want to get something back for it. And I think a lot of, especially like in the traditional neighborhoods, you see that landscaping and those trees, something like that.
I think that should be an option for putting the garages in the back. You know, particularly off an alley, for example, which is something that I think we need to insert somewhere as a possibility here, or a requirement. I'm not sure where we want to go with it. But interestingly, I did some planning work up in Chesapeake City, Maryland. And it's a small historic town, not unlike Lewis. And their zoning had a minimum front setback, not a maximum. In other words, they wanted all the houses or the new developments to look like the old town. And the old town had, you know, a sidewalk, a tiny front yard, maybe 5 feet, and then a porch, and then the house. And that's what they wanted to replicate. And all the parking was around the back. And so they had actually a maximum front setback, which was 10 feet. And everybody had to conform with that. And your porch could be in that front setback. So, you know, there are different ways of skinning the whatever here.
Well, I mean, thinking about some of the things that we've seen lately, I mean, when you have a parcel width of 25 feet or 30 feet, I'm assuming it's pretty hard to put a driveway that's going to start, you know, you're going to have a curb cut and a driveway that's going to pass by a house that's going to fit in that 25-foot lot or 30-foot lot. I mean, maybe we're going to do that. It seems to me when you get to a lot size, you're going to have rear loading, you know, alley type configurations. Am I reading that right?
It depends if you limit the curb cut and the driveway size. Because if you've got a 25-foot wide lot, and you're building a 20-foot wide house on the property, and again, I'm not considering setbacks, I'm just like putting something on there. But then you can have your driveway 20-foot wide in the front yard. So your front yard is pretty much the driveway. And I think what we're trying to do is get more of that grass area in the driveway. And I also put in that front porches and prominent main entrances are encouraged because you see that a little bit more.
Mhm.
Now, I think we also have to remember, because I think we seem to be wanting to replicate, you know, the downtown a little bit more, but we're also getting closer towards the county, which has got some of those larger lots and the other things. So we have to find that balance. And I'm not against or for anything because I've written all these kind of items down, but it's like, how does that balance what's going on in the county, and how do we, is it enough of an incentive to get somebody to want to annex into the city? Or is it just easier for them to just stay in the county? Because I think what we're trying to figure out is, I think you guys have recognized it's like there's development occurring, but the city would like a little bit more control over it. So how do we get them into the city so we can control over it? But is it enough of an incentive and a design item that it will make it positive for a developer to want to come in?
So, you know, like you so eloquently suggested, it may not just be, at least what I read in your comments in the last meeting, may not be just as simple as what we do on a density, on a setback, all the dimensional requirements basis. It's also about administratively how we might adjust the process. What ways might we explore to shorten and simplify and clarify the process as an additional incentive? And I hope we will explore that, because I think I have to believe that that's a real opportunity for everybody.
So I anticipate that coming out of the subdivision subcommittee, because a lot of that process is there. But if you want to say,
do we have a subdivision committee?
Yes, they have not met yet. They are still getting together.
Who is the subdivision committee?
John Nearboss is the chair. That just got set up in the last couple of weeks. So we're still getting members and getting that together. So that's a new one for us to start working on. Nancy, do you want something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was going to say the exact same thing, and that is, I think it falls under the subdivision, and it's looking more, because it would apply to everything, not just annexation.
Well, but I think, as Janelle was saying, we need to incentivize this. And so I think we should come up with the idea and suggest it to the subdivision committee, frankly, because I think they have a lot on their plate, and
yeah,
this won't be one of them.
So I've got a lot of ideas of just how to streamline the process, because to make it a little bit easier for commission, mayor, and the public to think about. But I'm going to bring those discussions and see where they land with the subcommittee. I'm hoping to get together with them in the next couple of weeks. But I think, are there other items that we can use as a carrot to get somebody to want to annex into the city?
I guess to me, one of the main questions is we're talking about trying to make it desirable to annex. And I don't ever, I mean, I've taken a look at some of it, but I haven't really lined up side by side. If you stick with the county, what's the process like? What are the rules like? If you go for annexation into Lewis, how does that compare? Because that's the judgment a developer is making, and I worry that at times we try to pick one thing here or one thing there that we think may make it desirable, but it's kind of looking at the overall package and saying, have we really done something that makes it desirable, but yet enables some level of control and oversight over what's getting built and designed.
Yeah, so I'm like, the rear loading, the alleys, the design is going to typically cost more money, and it's not, say, a developer's builder standard product.
Yeah.
So it's like, so how do we balance that out? Or if like we require, like a minimum of 3 architectural building styles within development, or 4 or 5, so not every house is the exact same, or we're requiring that mix of housing types, then what incentive do we give them to get them to want to come in? Because our process does take longer. It's a little bit more cumbersome, just because here it goes from the planning commission and council. In the county, it literally just stays with the planning commission. But I think the lot averaging, I think, could be a very nice carrot to try to get them to come in. I think some of the reduced setbacks, if we wanted to look at that, would be nice. But it's finding that balance.
Janelle, do you think the lot averaging could apply to townhouses as well?
Yes, but I think we could have like a minimum, because you don't want, like, because I've seen there are places that are 15-foot wide townhouses. I don't think they get built anymore. Typically the smallest I've seen built lately is like 20, 22. but most of them are coming in at 24, 26, 28 foot wide. But I think that that allows for, because I think most builders are putting like the master suite on the first floor, which is why they want the wider width of the townhouses and the duplexes. But I think we can definitely, I think you can average all of them, but maybe have a maximum and a minimum, because I don't think what you want is if you want a 15-foot wide townhouse or duplex, I think that's something you can consider. I don't know how if people want a 15-foot wide townhouse. And we lost Nancy.
Yeah, it's funny. I've thought often about the first house that my wife and I had back in the 80s, and it was a 16-foot wide townhouse in Wilmington. Granted, it was in the city. It was, surrounded by pavement. And all the parking was on street. And, if each household had one car, that was a feat by itself, which raises one of the questions I wanted to ask earlier, and I forgot. I got sidetracked. Must we require 2 off-street parking spaces? A lot of people have been asking. We've had a lot of questions about parking. And as we get further afield from downtown Lewis, if you will, is it essential that we have 2 off-street parking spaces? I'm asking, I don't know the answer.
I think that's a consideration you need to think about. And I think if you're going to require off-street parking, so if we say we do on-street parking one side of the street and then 1 off-street parking space, do you think that's adequate parking? And I think we also have to look, because what I hear a lot is we need the on-street parking, we need the on-street parking, we need the off-street parking, because we're worried about 2 times a year, 4th of July, or maybe 3, Christmas, Thanksgiving, when a lot of people are coming down, or the summer. But are we looking to have these as being second homes or first-time homes? Or I know a lot of people who, as they age, they're going down to 1 car, so they're sharing a car. So I think that's definitely something we can look at. And if we're gonna give up a parking space, what do we want in return? Because I'm like, you get something, we get something. And that's the way I'm looking at it, is to find a balance. It's like, okay, if you're going to do that, I'm like, do we get a couple extra parking spaces like near a clubhouse or a park or something? So, we can offset that a little bit. But that's if you think.
I mean, to me, that should be in the mix of the incentives. At least I'm willing to consider them being in the mix of the incentives that go with those greater areas that are being left alone.
I almost wish we had a developer on this committee, on this subcommittee, because I don't think that a unit is marketable with less than 2 spaces.
Okay.
Frankly, but I'm not the expert. I would think that a developer could answer that question very readily, or maybe a realtor. I'm not sure.
Well, we've heard developers. I mean, I can think back. It's in the public record. I can think back to times when Preston Shell has argued that based on all the calculations they were doing on the 2 properties between Savannah and Kings, they didn't really feel they needed all the spaces that we were requiring. I'm assuming he can make an argument.
Well, and I think you also have to look at who's living, because I only have 1 car. There are a lot of people who are single, only have 1 car. There's the younger generation who are not very big fans of cars. They like walking and biking. Now, we also have to keep that in mind as we're looking at items further and further away from the center of town. So they may need an extra car or be on a bike, so things like that. But I think I think it's something we can explore, put that as an option. As an incentive, like, hey, you can do 1 car parking, but you're going to give us something else.
Well, I mean, look, when you talk about, the fact that we're building out on the outside of town, and we're going to need to be able to drive into town, then the logical next question is, and where are we going to put them? We already have, and I say this often, Lewis is blessed not with one parking committee, but 2 parking committees. We have to get out of this mode of thinking that cars are the only way we can travel. I mean, you know, I ride my bike out to Route 1 all the time. You know, that's me. I'm happy doing that. But we should, maybe one of those trade-offs that you're asking about, Janelle, is that we're building a network of bike lanes, you know, bike paths that are a safe place for children to ride their bikes and so on. So that they
Right.
don't have to be dropped off with a car.
Or maybe
Yeah.
require, like, if we're going to reduce that, maybe require um, a bike multimodal path, like to tie into like wherever you can into a trail or something. So we
Exactly.
can encourage that. Encourage bicycle parking in the development. Like I had a development in other places, and it was like, you know, well, we're building, you know, a clubhouse. It's like, well, why don't you look at bike parking? And, you know, people are like, why? And I'm like, well, if I ride my bike in the neighborhood, I need to have a place for my bike to go. I mean, I might just not drive over to the clubhouse in some of the larger developments. I might want a bike. So I think definitely looking at alternative modes of transportation is important. I think, you know, trying to encourage the developer to work with DART to figure out bus stops is also important. But I think it's some of those kind of, you know, not everybody rides a bike, not everybody drives a car, so it's finding that balance. I feel like I'm just going to be repetitive. It's like finding that balance of what makes sense.
I've often thought we don't really,
I think it
I
all
mean, I
different.
totally agree with what you're saying, Janelle. We don't really specify anything about those other modes of transportation. And maybe this is a parking lot issue, but I would argue we should be. I mean, you know, the state, and my sense is now the county, is routinely using this complete streets approach to things. We aren't really doing that in the city, are we?
So, Nancy, you had something to say.
No, I was just saying that makes a big difference whether there's street parking available. And my concern is that when we're looking at some of these, that there's very limited street parking.
Having a hard time hearing you.
Nancy, you're breaking
Hear me
up
now?
really badly.
Nancy, do you want to put your comments in the Q&A? I think that would
Yeah.
be a good way to go, because unfortunately you're breaking up, and I'm going to blame the Grand Canyon for it.
We'll give you that. But yeah, that's a good idea. If you can, if there's a way to type them in, it may be better.
Yeah.
But Janelle, I mean, you know, like I said, the county's got. I'm assuming the county is operating. You know, I was driving up to Milton the other day, and I noticed, or no, actually, it was out, you know, in the interior of the county toward, you know, south toward 24. Most of the new developments have, you know, there's an ample margin on the side of the road. There's also a multi-use path.
Yeah, that's a DELTA requirement.
Right, that's the complete. I think that's the complete streets thing. We don't really have such a thing. Should we be making something like that?
So I think complete streets is also looking at sidewalks, because you need to have a place requiring sidewalks, which we do, which is great. But I think we also, as do we want to, on residential streets, want to have a separated bike path? I don't know if you need that in residential streets, but you definitely need that on the main streets. Because typically in a residential street, you're parking a little bit slower. You know, people are going to bike wherever in the street and maybe not in the bike path. And then it's like, how do we then also get the off-street parking and the, you know, and the dedicated bike lane? I think those are definitely things we can look at. I think we can also require bicycle parking if there's going to be some type of amenities to require bicycle parking, a bike rack or two there. But yeah,
you know, I wonder often if, you know, some of these things, if there's a way of sort of graphically laying out all these pieces to sort of, just sort of play what if scenarios, just to understand, possible ways that all these things we're kicking around, that they might look. If a developer were to interpret them, how might they interpret them? I mean, I'm just trying to understand how to meet these parking requirements and do service to the imagery that Melanie shared with us last time. I mean, if we've got 2 parking spaces off street, we got to have a driveway that's going to go back behind the house, it seems to me, or alongside the house. Or we're going to have the rear loading, alleys and all that, which I think is a really cool alternative if you've got a big enough site and you can rearrange it. But that's just me.
My worry is we're thinking of lots of things that I sound great, but they will all be hypothetical if we cannot make this willing to someone to actually decide to annex in. And I think we need to be thinking also about, what is going to make it appealing to folks. And on the parking issue, I think the amount of street parking really does make a difference because, first of all, our age group is still biasing, towards the more elderly, and not everyone can bicycle.
Yep.
And when you're further from town, it makes it more of a challenge. So as much as we can do to encourage it, it's great. But I think we still have to think of where people are going to park because people will have parties. And, what they'll do is they'll park where they shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, it happens. I mean, I think, I go to a friend's house and if it's a big party, we end up parking in the yard, It's also in the middle of nowhere. But it happens maybe once or twice a year. And that happens. But yeah, I think we need to take on a lot of different things. So
In a townhouse development, you can't easily park in the
no, you
yard.
can't.
So Melanie,
Usually,
I'm curious how we
especially after we get them to plant the trees in that yard.
yep.
how do we rectify this parking and other conversation with the imagery and the discussion we had going last time? I'm intrigued by the prospect, the possibilities that you laid out, and there are lots of different ways it can go. But now we're talking hard requirements that complicate and make it harder to do that. And I'm just curious how we can get it done.
I think a lot of what I've done is encouraged, put in the code as encourage. There are a few things it's like you require or as in you incentivize, but if we started requiring everything, I don't think anybody's going to want to annex and we'll never get what we want.
But if all we do is encourage, what really are we going to get?
Again, I think it's, I think it's the carrot and the stick, and I think if we go, okay, you want to do one thing, you're going to give us something else for it. And it's, because I don't think we can't require, we could require alleys, but to me, that's not Lewis. Because Lewis doesn't have that many alleys. It's really, there's a lot of on-street parking, especially in the downtown.
The whole beach zone has alleys between every block.
What does?
The beach zone, R3 Beach, there's alleys every block between Cedar and Bay.
Yeah, no, those are all roads. There's a couple of alleys, but
Carpenter Square, and there's the other one across on the other side of Savannah. So it's not that uncommon for there to be alleys. But
it's so, and I didn't say there weren't. I just said it's not common, because I think what you guys are trying to get to is the 3rd Street, 4th Street, Market Street, Chestnut Street, Mulberry Street kind of function. There aren't alleys there. There are a couple in the beach, and there's a couple around Shippar Carpenter Square, but there aren't for the newer developments. So it's finding that balance. I think if you wanted to require alleys, I think it would be really hard to get anybody to want to annex. I think if you if you build an alley, we're going to give you a break on this and that. I think
That's the way
maybe
I
we could
imagine
get somebody.
Yeah.
Well, that's the way I imagine it, Janelle. I'm not saying for all cases in all places that it has to be alleys, but I think it's a configuration that we should perhaps encourage as one of several options.
Yeah, no, I have rear loaded housing, which is alleys. Rear loaded house design, which is an alley. Garages in the rear and one car garage fronting the road. But we have to find, if we're going to allow that, what are we giving? And what are we asking for?
Okay, so given the, I mean, I guess this is why I always kind of imagine that terrible word, pattern books. I'm a visual person. I have a hard time dealing with a bunch of numbers in an array, in a two-dimensional array. In the very least, I guess we should try to figure out how to put this in an array, but I'd really like to see it illustrated somehow. How can we do that?
So, as Melanie pointed out, each development would end up having their own pattern book. There's not like a set pattern book. That's not typically what you get. If you're thinking more form-based, we could add some pictures, but that doesn't mean that's exactly what you're gonna get. Because
Sorry, what I mean is there a way to illustrate with graphically illustrate the numbers that I imagine you could rattle off in a table right now in terms of some of the things that you're sort of kicking around in your own mind, Is there a way that we can visualize that graphically as well as with a bunch of numbers? We should have them both.
Yeah,
That's
you just
all I'm
don't
asking.
typically put it in the code, but for discussion, we can definitely do that. Does that make sense?
I just had one other comment I wanted to make on this whole parking issue.
Yeah.
And that is, I think it may be possible to consider having, in some situations, allowing just a single space per, especially if I'm thinking of a situation where we're doing lot averaging or, and also with townhouses where, for the smaller townhouses, narrower lots, you require just one space on property. A parking for excess parking, and see this in a lot of places. It's not as expensive.
You're breaking up again, Nancy.
But I think it sounds like she's saying, if we work toward one off-street parking, we just have to create suitable common on-street parking or parking spaces that are available for anybody, that they're flexible and available to everybody.
So,
Now,
and
is that
I know
what-
you
is that
guys
what you're
don't
saying,
like,
Nancy?
so I'm going to bring up a plan that you just recommended approval for, and I know it's not exactly what you wanted, but Lewis Waterfront Preserve had off-street parking, so they had their driveways. They also had on-street parking because the roads were wide enough to allow parking on one street. But if you notice, they also had little parking spaces, little parking lots scattered throughout the development to allow for some of that overflow parking. Is that what you guys are kind of thinking about, is having like some little parking spaces? And I've also seen it like if somebody has, and again, the minimum required for a cluster is 10 acres. So you might not always get a clubhouse, but sometimes you do a clubhouse and you put that parking near there. And then you just have to walk maybe a block to get there, which typically isn't that strenuous on a person if you're coming for, a party or something.
So you brought up Lewis Waterfront Preserve, and part of the reason I brought up this issue of parking was because Melanie was very adamant about, at least the way I interpreted it, about reducing the number of cars sitting in the front of the house, between the house and the sidewalk, and so on. And maybe I didn't vote your way, Melanie, because I thought that the rules allowed what we had on paper to, what the developer wanted to do, that was what we would be trying to change the rules after the fact. That's part of the reason why I'm bringing this up. I felt like a lot of us were expressing frustration with various rules, and here's what we got. And I'm hoping that we can build from that on what things do we need to change. So if Yeah, I like those. I saw those little parking spaces that were sort of interspersed throughout the neighborhood, and I think that's the right idea. So I guess the question is, how many of those could you put in the development before you wouldn't need 2 off-street parking spaces per? Now, of course, there was a discussion about, well, there is the garage. I don't know how many people actually park cars in their garage. I'll admit my garage is full of other things. But that's the other way to calculate it. I don't know what the appropriate answer is here, but my motive here is built on all the comments that Melanie made in the last planning commission meeting, and trying to reduce that frontage that is committed to
Parking. We want that
parking.
grass is what I'm hearing, is we want that house feel, and we want that more of a residential aesthetic and not a parking lot aesthetic.
But also from a safety standpoint, as Melanie was saying, we need to not have all these cars backing over a sidewalk onto the street. And I think going back and looking through the presentation that she made last time, I think the other thing about the on-street parking, to the extent that it can be a meaningful way of parking cars, is they're out on the street. They're not crossing the sidewalk every time somebody's coming and going from their house. Melanie, I see you shaking, you're nodding. I mean, would you agree with that? I mean, how do we strike that balance?
It's a hard one. I mean, getting people to agree to an 11-foot driveway is going to be difficult. 2 cars outside the garage, as you're saying, is much more the norm. Although, and I have to say, I live in Pilottown Village, and almost everybody puts their cars in their garages. But Sumner, you live downtown or closer to downtown, and I think that's more common there because maybe the garages are smaller or retrofitted onto the units. I don't know.
Well, but I mean, I always ride. I don't ride down. I live on Pilottown Road. When I ride down into town, I don't ride down Pilottown Road because there isn't much of a margin. I don't really necessarily always feel safe with all the cars and boat trailers and everything. So I'll go down 4th Street. Sometimes I go through your neighborhood, Melanie, on my way to the grocery store or whatever out on Savannah Road. But going through like the Burton subdivision area, for lack of a better term, and some of the other streets that Janelle has invoked several times over the course of this meeting, most of those, it strikes me, are, I don't know what the lot widths are. Maybe they're 40, 50 feet, 30 feet. But they'll have a single driveway. They might be a 10-foot, they might be an 11-foot or a 12-foot driveway, and there'll maybe a car sitting in that driveway, or maybe there are cars in line with each other. I think that's more the model that I'd like to see us developing. And I just want to second Melanie's suggestion of having that setback, or maybe you said it, Janelle, the 6 to 10 feet back from the front of the house, whatever that may be, just to sort of take the cars back from the streetscape a little bit and make it a little more of a pleasant place to be. Now, is this too prescriptive? I don't know. I'd like to think there are ways that we all benefit from such an approach.
So what I could see this turning into is as options. But we've got to have something in the code. It's like, okay, you want to do a cluster, great. Here are your options, and you're going to have to pick like out of the options or something like that. And we have certain code requirements, but then it's like we get into parking. Okay, well, if you're going to do one off-street parking space, then you've got to do something else. And then if you're going to do garages, yeah, they have to be pushed back, and then you have to do something else. I think we have to provide options because not everybody's going to do everything. And I know
there's a couple of questions that have popped up here, and maybe we want to address them in a minute. But before we get to that, let me just suggest, that's why I raised the sort of tabular and graphical visualization things. In order to evaluate all these things that we're sort of kicking around, we need a way of comparing one to another. I don't want to get into this game of just saying every step of the way, well, we need to keep on making allowances. I think we need to see what we're getting for those. How do we put all of it together? How do you quantify, if you will? How do you aggregate all these different adjustments we're making so that we understand what the full picture is. That's why I was asking the questions about the images before.
Yeah, let me see if I can find some some images and let me take a look at see what we can do. Like if I come up with like, okay, we leave the lot sizes, but we allow lot averaging and we give a minimum and a maximum, so you can't go over those. You know, and start playing with some of these ideas that we have. And I agree, like if we would give up the 20-foot wide curb cut allowance, you increase the linear curb that increases on-street parking, because you can't park in front of the curb or in front of the driveway. So if you're reducing the driveway, you get an extra car on the street potentially.
Well, sort of. I mean, you gotta
Depending.
have a mini or something like that, because the width of a car is not the length of a car. So you've got to have this is why I raised the point about the minimum width of a lot. You know, you can't park a 20-foot car in front of a 20-foot or a 25-foot lot if there's an 11-foot driveway. If you know what I mean. I mean, you know, there's a limited amount of curb space when you've got these narrow lots with even a single driveway.
Right, but if you narrow the driveway, you might not pick up an entire parking space on the street, but if you keep narrowing it, at some point you're going to pick up an entire. You might get like for every 5 houses, you might get 1 extra parking space on street. So it's not 1 for 1, but it's a fraction that ends up still helps a little bit.
And I'm assuming that you also can arrange, you know, a developer
Yes.
can arrange how those driveways, you know, line up to maximize the curb space and so on.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you end up with like townhouse or duplex, you end up with a shared driveway, so it's in the center and maybe not at the edges. So you see a lot of different things, and I think, you know, how do we encourage what we want to see? And I'm hoping Councilman Ritzer is providing some comments. It's like even agreed, like the cumulative effect of multiple driveways being narrowed ends up getting you a parking space. Hopefully
So,
that's what you. Sorry, because he has his hand up, so I want to make sure if that's what he wanted to say, or if he wants to say something else. Just also remember, please, Councilman Richard, you will be voting on this at some point. So just a heads up, because my job is to keep people out of trouble. Even the commission, even myself.
So Joe, I see the comment as well about
Yes.
Randy Burton, and it's a good suggestion. I mean, I've always wondered if it would be good to have someone representing that interest on this committee.
Yeah, and maybe there's another builder you want to. I think once we get better ideas and sending it to them and inviting them in and having a discussion, I think is a good thing.
I think that might be a more given the way we're moving, kind of bouncing things around. I don't want to waste their time, and so
Right.
Yeah.
So I think if we narrow down, and I also, because there was a lot of talk, so the current, I'm going to get back to the current code, says that all of the open space has to be 1 parcel of land. That really doesn't happen in traditional neighborhood design, and limits the ability for pocket parks. So I was thinking maybe we tweak that and require like all the lots to front on some type of open space. So every lot has some access to some open space. That again, that might not always be possible.
So you're imagining something like the square that's in the middle of Ship Carpenter Square. Is that what that means?
So
No.
that would actually be what's in code now, is that your open space is 1 parcel of land.
Well, I think that if we really do want to encourage traditional neighborhood design, then part of our open space requirement should be a centrally located, multi-use common area that is perhaps, 15 or 20 or 25% of the total open space in the community.
Yeah, so the open space percentages, like for some of them, depending on what you do, is 30%, 40%, 50%. So you have to have 50% open space. But I think what we also don't want to do is limit, because again, we might have some woodlands that won't be because again, part of the cluster ordinance is also how do we protect our environmentally sensitive items, our wetlands, our floodplain, our woodlands, those items. They may not end up being centrally located to something, especially if we're talking about like a 10-acre parcel. So I think what we want to do is provide we want functional open space. We want good open space, but we don't want to, because I think I've got some ideas about like, one parcel has to equal a certain percentage of the open space. And I've also thrown in there, it's like, well, you got to have some type of active open space where there's a gazebo or benches and walking paths or pickleball courts or multi-purpose courts or a clubhouse. So we get some type, or just a tot lot of something, or a raised garden, for people to, like a community garden, for some type of additional open space that, try to be centrally located. But not every development is a square. Not every
Right.
parcel is, so that might, and especially depending, because again, we want to protect those floodplains, that they might be on the outer reaches and they might be able to tweak a little bit. So I think we have to find a balance there.
Janelle, on the active parts that you were just describing, I'm assuming that some of those things become more useful and relevant above a certain threshold in terms of size, number of households, number of acres, whatever the case may be. I'm assuming it shouldn't necessarily apply to everything, but there's got to be some factor in there. I don't know how to calculate that, but
yeah, because putting in a swimming pool doesn't make any sense for a dozen lots. You just can't afford that. But having maybe a little picnic area, or I've even seen like a fire pit area, just some type, you've got a little bit of open space that you can use as like some community kind of area.
But again, these are all really cool ideas, but how do you codify that?
Oh, you can require active recreation. So what did I put in there? That you need to have, as part of the open space, a portion of it has to be active recreation area, and you have to provide, it has to be provided within the open space. Doesn't say where. And that active recreation items may include, but are not limited to, gazebos, benches, walking paths, playgrounds, gardens, swimming pools, clubhouses, etc.
The problem is that even requiring all that, it's still going to wind up being a path around the stormwater management facility. It's not meaningful to the community. I really am fighting for something central, and I don't care if it's a little island with the mailbox on it, the common mailboxes on it.
Melanie, must it be central, or must it be meaningful and useful? Does it need to be of a certain size?
Go, Nancy.
Hey guys, can I suggest that maybe at our next meeting we have a focused discussion on open space, because I can show you some of the ways it's codified and what other jurisdictions are doing.
I think that sounds great.
We can definitely codify it. I've seen it so many different ways.
Yeah.
That's kind of why I threw it in there. Yeah. I think it's just we have to figure out, does it make sense for 5 lots? This, and I think that's all about the developer's going to come through and work with the commission, present an application. It's like, okay, I'm building 6 lots. I might put a fire pit with a little bench in a near maybe my stormwater management pond, or near something else. But I'm not going to put in a swimming pool, and I'm not going to put in a pickleball court, because financially that doesn't make sense. It's what's scalable and makes sense for the development.
Yeah.
So Nancy, I think I just heard you volunteer to make a presentation on your open space findings
at our next meeting on this. Okay.
I think that sounds like a great idea. Janelle, I'm wondering, you've made references to what sounds like you're working up a bunch of stuff. At what point do you feel that it's time to share what you're working up?
Let me, based on what I've heard today, I can share. Again, I took the code and just started tweaking it. Just don't be alarmed that I took out the wetlands buffer from the cluster section, because now there is a
Right.
wetlands buffer in the code. So I
Yeah.
took all of those references and said, like, you just got to comply with that. Because I'm trying not to be repetitive in the code. So just don't worry about the fact that I took that out. So yeah, let me play with it today, add a few things, a couple of ideas. And again, some of them are just ideas that I think we can expand on, and then I can send it out to you.
And Melanie, I'm wondering if there's a way of putting in code-ready language, the kinds of things that you're worried about with your useful, centrally located open space. I guess I'm hoping that you'll have that in mind when we're having a conversation next time.
Sure. You want me to send it out before the meeting so that we'll have time to do it?
Sure, that's great. So Nancy, if that works for you, I think it would be great to hear from what you found. It sounds like it's about time.
Yeah, I think so.
Any other issues?
The other thing that I'm grappling with is should we do something about house orientation?
Yeah, in your presentation, looking back over your presentation, I think you probably spoke about the issue of frontage roads and different ways of configuring, for example, Lewis Waterfront Preserve way back 2 years ago. When I went back and listened to what you said in the presentation you made to us in the annexation meeting, I hadn't really thought about turning the streets 90 degrees to the main road, like a new road or a Savannah road, and then having the sides of one set of houses closest to the road facing the road,
Right.
but all the streets running away from the main road, buffering all of that activity from all the noise and everything. That's a really cool idea that I think deserves some time. I mean, I'm assuming we can't be too prescriptive, but again, it should be an option. It should be an opportunity to be explored.
Right. Okay. Well, I will include that when I send out my notes.
Janelle, I mean, I kind of feel like we're at a good spot. Nancy, Janelle, do you have any thoughts, anything else before we try to schedule the next meeting?
Not that I can think of.
No, that's it for me.
Okay. So, do we want to try to schedule a meeting now, or do you want to do it offline?
Now would be good, because then we don't run into FOIA issues. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna admit it's the week of the 17th, because 2 weeks would be the week of the 10th, and there's stuff going on. But the week of the 17th, we could do Monday.
Monday afternoon would be possible for me, not Monday morning. Wednesday would be a great day for me.
Okay.
Wednesday morning, at least.
So the 19th?
Yeah, I'm assuming we have a planning commission meeting that evening.
We do.
We want to do 2 meetings in one day.
That's up to you guys.
Sorry, I didn't hear what Melanie said.
Do you want to do 2 meetings in one day?
Oh, I mean, I'm happy to do, if you'd rather do Monday afternoon, we could do that. I just can't do Monday morning. Can we do like 1 or 2 o'clock on Monday?
Yeah.
That would work for me. Could we do like 2 o'clock on Monday?
Okay.
Does that work?
Sounds good. Sounds
Okay.
good.
All right.
All right, Monday, May 17th, correct?
2 p.m.
Yes.
All right,
2 p.m.?
super.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much, guys.
All right.
Thanks,
Have
everybody.
a good afternoon, everybody.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.